You're a host now.
I just made you a host, so
Yeah.
let's see if you can do it now.
Now you can go, just hit record at the bottom right.
Got it, recording.
Awesome.
Okay, so I'm going to pretend that first poem didn't exist between recording problems and cat cameos. I'm going to try again, okay? I should have warned everybody. I have 4 cats who basically ignore me until I'm on Zoom, and then they all want my attention. So the second poem that I would like to read is actually not found in my chapbook. It's found, it's a recent publication, and it's from the Bridge Literary Arts Journal. And Northern Pennsylvania right now is trying to do something pretty exciting. We are trying to boost the literary arts in our community, and anybody who lives in a rural community knows how hard that is to do. This particular journal, the Bridge Literary Arts Journal, is a very small literary journal that is located in Franklin, Pennsylvania. And the poem is called "To All the Girls Who Have Shoplifted Lipstick." Maybe you are 17, broke and tired, tips from working at Tammy's Cafe stored away for car insurance or future college textbooks. There's little left for makeup or new clothes, and you love the shades that promise to last through hundreds of sips, bites, and kisses, but really only stain bum cigarettes you smoke on your breaks. Or maybe you are 14 and on a dare you slip plum or pretty peach into your purse, listening to the gasp of your giggly friends. Or maybe you are 10, wearing your sister's clothes, hemlines dragging, a waistline that dips and sags from your non-existent hips. Already, you reason, you are forced to be like her, resentment hanging like her old jean jacket off your skinny shoulders, the contraband CoverGirl colors tightly in your fist. Or maybe you were only 6, slipping a chapstick-like tube into your mother's purse, even after she told you no. You think it will taste like strawberries or pink lemonade. You like the pale pink, the way that it looks, like the soft pads on your cat's feet, or maybe even the pieces of chewed bubblegum someone has spit out onto the street. Okay, it's starting to feel like October here. Okay, and that's something that I mentioned before. So I'd like to read a poem, and I tell my students, I teach at a small community college with a lot of students who are very new to poetry, but also believe that poetry does not belong to them. Poetry is something that dead people wrote a long time ago, or that they're taught not to understand or try to understand because they will get it all wrong. Okay, that's what they think poetry is. And many of them Google my name after they find out that I'm teaching creative writing, and they find my poems. And the one question they always ask me is, are these poems true? Okay, if you write narrative poems or if you read narrative poems, you're probably, that thought does go through your mind. And I tell my students that I'm not always the narrator in my poems, but I know her very well. And with this particular poem called Joyride, it's in an anthology called Local News, Poetry About Small Towns, okay, edited by Tom Mantag and David Graham. The poem is actually based on a true story. Okay, it is something that really happened to us in me and a good friend of mine when we were trying to taste our freedom of having a car. Joyride. The night after a 3-point turn on a test gave her a driver's license, my best friend borrowed her mother's car, missed the turn at Potter's Grove, and then plowed into our cornfield. In the passenger seat, I laughed, giving directions, back wheels spinning through October mud and ears bent low, silk brown and damp. That's how it was like with us, 2 girls always threatening to leave what we called a one-stoplight town, when in fact there were 3, often green, short-circuited, a squirrel chewing through a straight wire, a storm snapping a loose cable in two. It should have been easy for us, but there was always a check engine light, a crack in the window, a rear tire worn raw. It took us years to figure it all out. All we needed to do was throw a suitcase in the back seat, tilt the rear view window away so we couldn't see what fell behind us, strings of stores sealed tight with plywood, streets lights dull, even in the darkest of dusts. Okay, I am going to turn back to my chapbook. And my students seem to like my narrative poems the best, so that's what I'm going to probably finish off on today. I'm going to read two more. One is called The Water Tower. This summer, everyone in town got religion. Two local boys on a dare with 6 drinks scaled the water tower, scrawled Amanda Forever in neon pink paint. Everyone admired the curve of the M, the round belly of the D, then talked about the men from M&A Products, how just off second shift, they spotted Christ in the closed consignment shop on this corner of Center Street and South Main. It's not hard to find a God here, said my father, in a town he claimed was made of churches and bars. I knew he was right. I counted crosses and chorus signs until I ran out of fingers. I watched for a savior in chipped plywood that bound the town stores in a tight fist, saints in real estate signs buckling under buckshot. Even my brother's truck went unwatched and scrutinized with neighborhood kids finding bearded faces in the muddy debris. Seeing nothing but dirt, I turned towards the water tower, altar of steel and fiberglass, and then looked for Amanda and the tattooed woman who scooped Rocky Road at the ice cream parlor, and the girl who pumped gas at the last full station in town, full service station in town, and the young cashier at Sam's Superette who stood twirling strands of hair around her ring finger and counted change backwards into the hard palms of construction men. Okay, my last poem, a lot of my readers say that my poems are full of gloom and doom, okay, and I guess that's kind of the images of the Rust Belt, but I just recently gave an interview with a local literary journal, and I said, in spite of the gloom and doom, that's not just in the Rust Belt, but in the United States in general, I'm seeing a lot of hope. And sometimes you have to look a little hard for it, but I believe it's still there, and I'm still seeing a lot of that. So I always end my poems with a popular poem that many people seem to like, but I think it's a poem of hope, and it's called Roadkill Girls. We fled summer's heat for the shade of Sycamore Road. Barefoot and cat-scratched, we posed as princesses, wearing cockleburs as crowns, blue chicory for corsages. We sidestepped beer cans and broken glass, kicked coils of razor wire and whiskey bottles filled with thick pools of tobacco spit. Bones rested in the nests of gravel and guardrails, whole skeletons scattered by tractors and pickup trucks. We knew what peered from behind the ragweed and purple thistle, what curled around bent speed limit signs. For every antler or loose feather we found, groundhog teeth, a set of claws, soft wisps of a rabbit's tail. Sometimes we grew brave, flicked maggots from fresh kill, the dull thud of soft bodies hitting tree bark reminding us of June bugs hurling against back doors and bedroom windows. At the end of each day, we whisk our treasures home, and decorated our rooms. The skulls on our dressers never scared us, even when a jaw curved into a smile or the empty eye sockets all winked. With every bone, we planned our new world, starting with a single rib from a raccoon. And thank you.
Feel free, guys, if you want to unmute so that Karen can hear our admiration with in-person sound. So.
Thank you. And thanks for all the nice chats too. I'm reading everybody's chat.
True. Ever since I first encountered your poetry, you know, I recognized that sense of place, that I had that admiration for the sense of place that you have in it. I recognize it. And, you know, when you recognize something in what somebody's doing and you recognize how exactly right they get it. And it's also awesome when, you know, you feel like you recognize something, but you're learning something at the same time. It's not an image that you could have imagined yourself and they give it to you. And so I appreciate that a lot about your work, Karen. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, next up is going to be Mr. Michael Meyerhofer. Give me just a second here and we'll find out whether we have a bio for him.
Make one up.
Well, I could, but there's no bio could hold all the accolades that Mr. Meyerhofer has earned. So he's won like every contest that there ever was. You know, he just dashes stuff off and they're winners. So makes the rest of us insanely jealous. Michael Meyerhofer's fifth poetry book, Ragged Eden, was published by Glasslyre Press. He has been the recipient of the James Wright Poetry Award, the Liam Rector First Book Award, the Brick Road Poetry Book Prize, and other honors, which number in double digits. His work has appeared in many journals, including Hayden's Ferry, Rattle, Brevity, Tupelo Quarterly, and Plowshares. He is also the author of a fantasy series and the poetry editor of Atticus Review. For more information and an embarrassing childhood photo, visit his website, which you can find in the event page here on Facebook. And I will also say, Mike and I go back quite a while now, longer than I'd like to admit because it tells how old that we are. But we went to graduate school together. He was in the poetry program at Southern Illinois, Carbondale, and I was in the fiction program, and he was one of the first contemporary poets that I really read. So he was around, he was doing good work already, earning accolades even in grad school. So you wanted to see what was going on. And so a big influence. And I tell everybody who will listen what a great poet he is. And I think one of the biggest compliments that I can give Michael is that I gave his book to a buddy of mine who took it into an Irish bar in Jefferson City, Missouri. And the bartender picked it up and then didn't give it back. And so the bartender wanted to keep reading it. And what was even better was my buddy took me into that bar like 6 months later. And my buddy introduced me to the bartender. He goes, "That's that poet I was telling you about." Because he had showed him my book too. And he goes, "Oh, you're Michael Meyerhofer?" And he got very excited. And I had to be like, "No, I'm just Justin Hamm." And he goes, "Well, that's okay too." But there's a little story about Mike. And I'm going to turn it over to him. And I know that you guys are going to enjoy his great work.
Thank you, Justin. For the record, I don't believe a word of that story, just so you know. It is an honor to read with Karen and Justin. Just to be blunt, there are a lot of assholes in this profession, but there are a lot of great people too, and it's great to read with to be in a sort of an Oreo configuration with two great readers. Recently, I've been experiencing something called depression. I don't know if anyone's ever had anything like that, but I saw this news story that ended up being like exactly the story I needed to see that day. So that's the title of this poem. Upon seeing video during the age of COVID of a 3-year-old girl caught in a kite and lifted high into the air. These days, it seems like no matter how we try to keep our distance, things end up where they shouldn't. shell casings, Bibles, the stony mobs of nearly 200,000 pelvises stacked in ice cream trucks like an apology everyone forgot to whisper. But how to prepare for what we cannot see? I hear that long before Twitter and child-shaped cages and this most recent dearth of hospital beds, the Chinese general used a cowskin kite to see how far his men would have to tunnel under the palace walls. God, what won't we do for victory? But the part I keep replaying again and again in this crushed beer can of a world is the moment when the wind gives up and she falls like a chandelier, but never hits the ground, feels only the army of hands rushing in to catch her. I must have watched the video for that story like 30 times and like cried like an 8-year-old. Speaking of, I'm an animal lover, and a while back I had to put one of my cats down, which was like the worst thing in the universe. So here's another sad poem. I promise I'll try to get happier later. Last lesson from the vet's office. Well, we'll take care of her now, said a man whose name I do not know, over the remains of 16 years spent chewing on the window blind cords, sometimes lying so close while I worked that she stretched across my very knuckles, like she knew I was trying too hard to say something about trauma. She who forgave my overgroomed whiskers, the hitch in my gait, how much trouble I had meeting that whirlpool gaze as her taut gray face fell to one side. I read a lot of poems about like ancient history and Neanderthals and stuff because I'm like a archaeology nerd, but I don't know anything, so I just watch videos on YouTube. But a while back, I was in a museum and they had done like a reconstruction of a Neanderthal skull. So upon holding in my hands the reconstructed skull of a Neanderthal. All those years you swung an axe at the strange miracle of fruit, or sent your breath through a reed in the gaps between mountains. Not once did you get to tilt your brow and jaw as I do now. Not once did you have the pleasure of weighing your own brain pan in your naked palms like water, feeling the heft of those dreams that waved atop your teetering spine like the head of a crackling daisy. I would like to think you'd say something miraculous if you could, but probably you just wonder what we've done to the grass, the unnamed beasts, the rivers where you used to kneel in the heady silence after the hunt, and marvel at the strangeness of using hands full of blood to wash the blood off your hands. As Justin said, I'm also an editor, and one of the hardest things about being an editor is sending out rejection letters, because if you're a writer as well, you know what that's like. And I understand that what we always tell writers, aspiring writers, is don't take it personally, and yet we ourselves take it personally every single time, right? So this is an attempt at being funny. We'll see. Editor's lamentation. Often when I send out rejections, I think of the houseflies I have to chase all around my place in the summer with a can of Raid or a rolled up magazine that may or may not contain a poem of my own, proof of another's generosity. No, I'm not calling my fellow writers insects with their busy little legs and the way they co-opt my cat's food bowl, stubbornly refusing my pleas for a safe exodus through the window I've cracked just for their survival. I mean the guilt. The apologies I whisper as I run the bathroom sink over their still twitching bodies, and most of all, how it feels to watch them spiral to the floor like the fading chords of an opera sung in the language of too many eyes, cast down near a refrigerator filled to the brim with coffee and liquor and 3 different kinds of meat sliced thin as bandages. Here's a weird one. Postcard from the deep. Turns out the devil is pretty boring. Spends most days telling stories about typos and divorce papers, comma splices and suicide notes. Occasionally, he starts to tell a joke about monks and a stripper and a bowl made of bread, but keeps forgetting the punchline and trails off. His shadow, a slumped gargoyle, then a captcha that keeps changing. You see those weak slats of sunlight leaking through the brimstone rafters? He tried his hand at gardening, but all the rows came up askew, soybeans choking turnips, star fruits like underfed zoo animals. Sometimes he'll sit there for hours in a chair made of fish bones, mumbling to anyone who will listen about how those tumbling beams actually hail from quasars, which are supermassive black holes at the center of galaxies, the ones with too much to swallow. I only get what's thrown away, he complains, then shrugs, and his shadow twists into a noose, then a running horse, then a flower you cannot name. Here's another kind of a weird poem that just proves I'm not well. Epilogue of the Chosen One. One day, you're trying to kill a shapeshifter with a spork, or dangling from a chopper that's spiraling into a live volcano. The next, you're fiddling with the guts of a station wagon, or asking drunk teenagers to upgrade their super slammy meal. You try to keep that edge by tiring yourself out with push-ups, then assembling handguns blindfolded. But you can't outrun the truth as easily as you did that squad of trans-dimensional cyborgs. The world doesn't need you anymore. The last hellmouth sealed, the mothership tricked into a black hole, burgeoning artificial intelligence persuaded to choose cupcakes over nuclear warheads. Still, you're trying your best to fix your tie in this gas station mirror, wondering why no one responds to your dating profile. Maybe in time the president will call to say thanks, but right now you're late for the funeral, the grand opening, the last meeting before a new sales quarter. And just like that, you spot her in the parking lot. That mysterious brunette who wants absolutely nothing to do with you. Only she's lost her keys, and in less time than it took you to escape purgatory, she wants to know how you learned to hotwire cars. She sidles closer. You smell flowers. Her eyes gleam like shell casings. But you walk away, unsure where to start. Here's a short one. Rear view mirror. It's late in a city with too few streetlights, and an elderly couple bicycles down Blackstone Avenue. Not in a line, but beside each other. The husband on the outside so that cars pass inches from his hip. He does not falter. I wonder if he's chosen this to shield her, or if he just wants to be next to her if she speaks, not back there where all he has is the heady whoosh of traffic. I watch, but for those few seconds I see her face. She says nothing. Most of these are new-ish, but here's kind of an old one. Home field advantage. Tonight in factory towns all across America, teens are sneaking onto empty football fields, braving padlocks, hopping fences, dodging cop cars as they coast like frigates through the Midwestern dark. See how they gather, preps, Scots, jocks, gearheads, jerseys and tongue studs, a shifty knot of mussed flannel and padded bras, raw hearts somersaulting with hormones and bad lyrics. Note their backpacks full of beer and expired condoms, whispers of broken curfews, overheard talk of layoffs, those ubiquitous gay jokes. How their laughter goes taut when faced at last by bleachers where so many forebears sat fidgeting, scarred hands cupping children's names, hurtled onto the turf like prayers, like dead saints invoked before the blitz, the Hail Mary, the grand implausible touchdown. This will be my last one. I don't have kids, but lately I've been thinking about what it would be like if I did. So yeah, blah, blah, blah. Dear daughter, I know you don't exist, But say we were halfway back from seeing a friend in a bullet-smooth casket, and you asked what to expect if there really is no God, no passing like water mouth to mouth. And I told you in the car between one tree-named sign and the next, the worst-case scenario. When we die, we pass to nothingness. That same shapeless garden from whence you came, like the darkness in a vase we filled with milk and light. Or, put another way, I'm not afraid of being eaten by whatever gave us you. Yeah, thank you. It is my super honor to introduce Justin Hamm. I will read his bio and then I'll probably see if I can come up with an embarrassing story on the way. Justin Hamm's most recent books are The Inheritance, Poems and Photos, and Midwestern, a book of photographs. He's the author of 2 other poetry collections, American Ephemeral and Lessons in Ruin. His poems, stories, photographs, and reviews have appeared in Nimrod, the Midwest Quarterly, Sugar House Review, Pittsburgh Poetry Review, and a host of other publications. Recent work has also been selected for New Poetry for the Midwest and the Stanley Hanks Memorial Poetry Prize for the St. Louis Poetry Center. In 2019, his poem, which is an awesome poem, Goodbye, Sancho Panza, was chosen as part of the curriculum for the World Scholars Cup. It's been studied by approximately 50,000 students around the world. In September, the WSC flew Justin to the Philippines to deliver the keynote address for their Manila Global Round. I didn't come up with an embarrassing story in that 10 seconds. But like I said, I've known Justin for a long time. And he probably doesn't remember this, but I remember in grad school, there was one day where I finished teaching a class. I was like really rattled because I was trying to help the student and I couldn't do it. Everything was bombing. And he just like saw me in the hallway. He's like, hey dude, what's going on? And like he, again, probably doesn't even remember, but he like took me aside and talked to me and like totally reaffirmed my my belief not only in teaching, but in humans. So in addition to being one hell of a writer, he is a great person and it is my honor to introduce him. Justin.
Thanks, man. That means a lot. So it's always good to hear kind words from people that you admire a lot. And you know, I want to echo what Mike said too. It really is. Man, there's so much ugly in the literary world, which is so silly because we're fighting over scraps anyway. I mean, we really are. And so I love to be able to associate myself with people that are good literary citizens, to use a term that goes around now. I mean, why would you want to be around people that aren't trying to do good and in addition to making good art? So thanks for that, man. I'm gonna open with a poem maybe that you'll have to forgive me if I get a little emotional on this one. I've been thinking about it all weekend. So I'm a K-12 librarian, and our district had a tragedy last week. We lost a student, somebody I had in 7th and 8th grade in my library classes and was attending the high school that I'm the librarian at. And while the details of that tragedy are not exactly the same as what's in this poem, the sentiments are pretty dead on for what you feel like as a teacher, and then also maybe what some of the people surrounding it right now are feeling. And so I'm going to read this mainly just to give voice to those feelings, if it's okay. This is called The Best Friend's Lament. 29 miles from nowhere to East Nowhere, Missouri, dead of winter, wind blind, leather jacketless, rattling around the back of a drunken farm boy's pickup, nose to nose with the frozen carcass of yesterday's buck. And all because the girl at the end of this rural route has a parent empty house and the right sort of prairie sadness in her eyes. We all know the way this old ballad goes. The cast of white headlamps around the sharp country bend, the heavy sheriff crunching through the hard mud rows of a frost-marbled field, everything eerie beneath the blood-red sunrise. But I swear, It would never end with a mother cradling an old baseball trophy like an infant. Not if they made me God of the Middle West. So, this is called The Everyday Parade. This is a watcher poem. I know artists tend to be watchers a lot. You know, people watchers. We like to sit and observe, and so this is definitely a watcher poem. But of course, the damned old pickup won't start again, and they missed the marching bands in their bright uniforms, the Shriners tiny in their go-karts, the waving Santa and the hailstorm of dum-dums and Laffy Taffies. So next morning he calls them both in sick. No loading the fish trucks today, none of that endless tracing of loopy letters on wide-ruled paper. She helps him swap out the fuel pump for one from the junkyard delivered by goateed uncle on motorbike. And all afternoon they sit uptown, a pair of grease-stained gearheads in the white sunshine, watching the long, slow procession of the everyday parade. The mother who waits until her daughter leaves the restaurant to light a secret cigarette. The old men through the window of the bridal shop telling with animated hands what must be jokes or whoppers. 3 stray dogs locked in tight formation, the mangiest and most loyal-looking mutts ever to slink along a stretch of city street. A beer keg hauled by big, enthusiastic boys in shorts and grimy ball caps from truck bed to duplex door. And finally, not St. Nicholas, but a gangly old splotch-faced drunk, trip-stepping up 4th Street and crooning Sinatra from under his Victorian mustache, singing just the way a catfish might if he believed no one could possibly hear his notes, swimming or sinking flat beneath the spread and weight of all that muddy water. I tried to do some that I haven't done in a while. So this is called Rust Song. And this is, some of you guys know I'm a photographer too. And, you know, I'm obsessed with rusty things and decaying things. And so this poem comes out of that experience, out of traveling around and trying to photograph and capture rust. Rust, you are a heartland impressionist painter. Philosophies brailled out all across your abrasive face. You, sir, are the very color of the crater childhood made in the middle of me, a coffin suit to keep the corpse of my Midwest dressed. But you are mostly beautiful from afar. In the hard light of harder times, I expect you'd have grown less romantic as you tainted our tools and sealed our sheds beneath an imperial crust of your self-rust. And I imagine it would have been much harder to hum a hymn to you. So this is one I almost never do. It's kind of fun since I read with Francine a few weeks ago. And so I'm kind of digging into the bag here and finding some things that I don't normally read. So here's an interesting thing. I grew up for a long time in the Pentecostal church. And I am a long ways from that now, you know, in my beliefs. But it was a pretty interesting way to grow up. We weren't snake handling Pentecostals, but there was definitely some interesting stuff going on there. You know, I definitely had some friends who would be like, you know, you should come to my church. And I would, right? And then I'd be like, now you should come to my church. And they would. And then we wouldn't talk anymore because they were, you know, terrified of me. So, but through all of that, when you're a kid, there's, all things are possible, if that makes sense. And so I want to take you back to a time where I was a Pentecostal kid and thought all things were possible. This is called Tent Revival. The crimson-faced pastor howls a river of crooked creek babble, and I find myself drifting toward the altar yet again, whole galaxies of inevitability unwinding in my chest as the red throat in me spreads wide its dove wings, and I am made into all matter between blood and electricity. Sparks leap the black gap between bottom and top teeth, that necessary separating, that opening up of the birth canal for the coming of God's own spontaneous trill. Now the arms extend, ascend without my consent, waving, reaching at unreachables high in the starry smeared evening. I used to believe something grand could have happened there in the middle of golden October, but for my tongue, that sleeping serpent who remained always my own, cynical, stubborn and sullen, and still too much made out of low terrestrial gravies to ever sing the celestial song. And I guess that speaks to, if you don't fit that lifestyle afterward, there's a tremendous amount of guilt that comes along with that, right? Like you think there's something wrong with you, because you can't get with those beliefs or make it happen. And so a tremendous amount of good things happened to me from growing up that way, but then also a lot of guilt and things that you carry with you and still realize you're shedding it, at 40 years old. So, so this was mentioned in my bio, so I'll do this one. This poem is crazy. People ask what can you get out of poetry or what can it do for you? And I'm always one of those people that's like, well, you can write it and you can get that out of it. Like you wrote it, and that feels pretty good. So, but one time about 10 years ago, I wrote one and it got published in a couple of different places. And then a crazy thing happened and kids from India and Vietnam and China and, Canada, far off places like Canada started emailing me about it and asking these questions. And at first I thought somebody was playing a joke on me, but their questions were right on. It was clearly intelligent kids asking very in-depth questions about my work. And I was like, something weird's going on. And so it turns out that one of my poems got picked up by this World Scholars Cup. It's an enormous organization that kids all over the world compete in. And so they were trying to get a leg up on the competition by, getting some insights into the poem. And later on, the folks who run it contacted me and invited me out to, fly to the Philippines and give a speech. And so clearly the coolest thing that's ever happened to me as a poet. But the crazy thing is, for me, I'm sitting right now pretty much in the same spot where I wrote that poem 10 years ago, and it was no different than any other poem that I've written, just trying to be honest. So if that tells you anything, you have no idea what your work's going to do or what might happen to it. Once you do it, you send it out into the world, and, the magic either happens or it doesn't, but you really only control, what you do in that moment. So when people ask me for wisdom about that kind of stuff, I'm like, the only wisdom I have is write some more poems. That's kind of the best we can do. So I'll read that one for you guys. This is called Goodbye Sancho Panza. And this is about when my first kid was born, Abby. And, that feeling of entering adulthood and kind of getting rid of some of the, not getting rid of, but losing some of the freedoms that entails. So, Goodbye Sancho Panza. I meet a slim Jim munching Sancho Panza, goateed now, all leathered out and in close contact with his inner beast. 500 years after the death of his beloved mule, He rides a Kawasaki, wants to know if I will sally forth with him through Missouri as his loyal, dim-wit squire. There's this broad he's supposed to meet near the riverside in Cape, he explains. So I pull out my blues harp and I toot a few notes while I think of the baby, my sweet, scented daughter whose pudgy, upturned nose matches my own. A newborn's a fragile thing, a soft, cooing heap of possibly maybe, long before it hardens into something permanent like a soul. And for the first 3 weeks, I refused to use her name. Earlier tonight, I drank to overcoming these fears, to Jesus and science and green bean casserole. But Sancho is as sober as an ice cube, as serious as any grain of sand. And despite the longing, I'm forced to decline. Missouri is veined with deep, winding caverns, so many of her secrets tightly concealed. In any way, I'm too old and civilized now for the sort of digging it would take to learn anything good. I'm going to move into the inheritance, and I'm just going to do a couple out of here as well. So I'm going to try to find a couple that I don't normally do. So this is the first poem out of the inheritance, and it might be the most honest thing I've ever written about what it means to want to be a poet. What do poets want? Okay? So this is called Don't Want Much. Don't want much, just to write one little poem, sharp as obsidian, to snake charm time and preacher heal cynicism, to build a ladder to the distant stars and live 2,086 years in the hearts of Danish school children, deep in the belly of the immortal raven. Do maybe two more, one a little bit longer and then one short one, and then I'll be finished for the night. So this is one that I almost never do, and that's mainly because I've been touring with my photography show, and it has a very Midwestern theme, and so some of the really personal poems that I write don't always get done in those particular readings. So I'm going to take a chance to do one that's extremely personal that I don't normally read. This is called Sleeping in the Town of My Birth. Sleeping in the town of my birth is not particularly a comfort nor an anxiety most of the time. Surrounded by the usual joys, my daughters and wife snoring beside me, a third child about the size of a blueberry in the belly, the usual worries nonetheless flash like slasher movie scenes against my closed eyelids. Rare cancers, car crashes, humiliating professional rejections, and stranger things too. Old blues riffs ringing like invisible church bells, something Jim once said to Huck in the good book. The only real difference here is the nagging knowledge that somewhere among the giant warped Victorians, a man sleeps better than I. The man who sold to my mother the fentanyl patches she tore open with her teeth and animal lapped with her tongue until her damaged heart went quiet one bone-numb winter night as my father dreamed his last hopeful dreams of ever growing happy beside her. I am a gentle person. Ask around. I strum a ukulele. I read to kindergartners professionally. But I confess, when not at my best, I've imagined entering his bedroom, silent as he snores, of covering his eyes, plugging his nose with thumb and finger, and pouring her ashes thick into his gaping mouth hole, so he too can know firsthand the pain of waking at 3 a.m., choking on her memory. And I'll do just one more. So that's a painful poem. I'll do one that's a little bit more about healing. And this one is called Colorado. I sit beneath the first sun, yards from the cautious mule deer, and name myself by parts. The right arm of insignificance, the left eye that also matters not, the heart about which no words need be said. The mule deer grows easier with each new erasure until he finally moves near enough to touch. But too late. I have receded into the mountain crags, turned memory like morning fog. Thank you.
Yay.
It was amazing, Justin and Michael.
And Michael.
Yeah.
Way
we
to go,
didn't
guys.
have to clap, Michael, so.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yay.
Yeah. Thanks guys so much. This was awesome. It's gosh, right now, you know, any gathering of art-minded people to share is like valuable beyond anything, you know, that you can even describe. What I thought we'd do here at the end, I always like a few minutes. I know some folks are going to have to go, and I will eventually too, to make sure my littles get put to bed. But if we could take, you know, 5 or 10 minutes and just open it up. If anybody's curious about anything from Karen, Michael, or myself, and wants to ask any questions or anything like that, you know, we can all unmute and throw them out there. I know we have some budding poets with us too, so you guys are welcome. I don't know about me and my wisdom, but I know that the other two folks over here that I'm looking at can offer you guys some excellent wisdom. So
Yeah, feel free to comment and ask questions, girls.
I got to bow out, though. It was great. Thank you, guys. Amazing reading.
Thanks, Connie.
Coming.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, Connie.
Morgan, did I see some of your same sort of similar themes to Karen's? You write a lot of poetry that, I don't know, I just felt like you might have a little kinship there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually, when listening to everybody's poems, I actually was really inspired to write a few ideas down on my own. So I'm very grateful for your guys' readings. This is actually the first reading that I've ever attended, so I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
thanks for coming. Yeah, we appreciate that a lot.
Yep. That's one of the big things, I think, is listening to other people read. If I'm like, I got nothing in the tank and I just don't have any inspiration, but I feel like I need to write, like something's wrong with me if I don't write, I'll go and either read some stuff, pick up a book, or you can just go to YouTube and listen to a reading, or I'll go to whatever reading I can and just read other people's stuff. And that'll be a huge inspiration. Yeah.
I'm really curious as to your processes, like how, when you do poems come to you, or do you sit down to write a poem? Or I'm just really curious about everyone's process.
Well, I guess I can answer first. I don't have a great process. I do try to write every day. A lot of it isn't very good. But I have a really good friend who's an artist, and she tells me, and I came from a blue collar background, so I admire this. She said, art is like, you know, working a blue collar job. You just get up and you do it. So I wish, you know, I have different strategies that I do when I can't write, or when I think I'm writing the same poem over again, which tends to be problematic. And that is, I do read poems and I try to imitate them line by line just to see what happens. And that's probably my go-to strategy, but I would be interested to see what Justin and Michael do.
That is great advice. That's really, really good advice. I used to teach creative writing, and one of the things I would tell is actually an idea I stole from Billy Collins, but you take someone else's poem and you take the first couple lines, you steal the first couple lines, and then you rewrite the rest, because your heart and your mind and your experiences are totally different. So you're going to end up somewhere else. So then all you got to do is go back and change the beginning, and you have a whole new poem. Yeah, I really like what you said, Karen, about it is like a blue collar job. You just have to get up and do it. I mean, I have a lot of friends who say, well, I don't know if I want to do this or that. Like, just do it. Just start writing. There's an essay, a lot of writers are teachers. There's an essay we tend to teach for research writing, which is called Shitty First Draft. And it's like you just have to put out a shitty first draft, and it's a mess, and that's fine. And then you clean it up later. All of my first drafts of poems are horrible and embarrassingly bad, and that's totally cool. You know, you just like for me, it's like starting with an idea. It could be a line or an image, or I hear something weird or disturbing or cool on the news. I'm a history nerd, so I watch way too many documentaries, and then I just start writing. And it's always a mess at first. Like if you compare the final draft, which may be okay, to the first draft, which is an absolute disaster. Like, yeah, you just get started. I think the trick is, for me at least, the trick is don't think. Like just start writing. Yeah, clean it up later.
I really agree with that, Mike. And I was gonna say, I think the moment for me where like I felt like I was really doing it was when I recognized that all the first drafts suck and it's okay. Like I trusted, my talent and ability that the idea was good and it was going to be there when it needed to be there, if that makes sense, rather than like a lot of people, I think that's what happened to me as a beginning writer a lot is I gave up on a lot of stuff that were great ideas because I didn't have any faith that I would ever pull it through, so you look at what's there and you go, oh God, this is awful. But when you mature as a writer, that's when you start to understand, but it won't be. It's fine. Like I know enough that I'll get it there. It may not end up being the greatest poem that I ever wrote, but I'll find some solutions along the way. And it'll become something, I just have to put the time in. So I'll say what you guys said, but I'm going to go a little differently. So I also come from a big blue collar background, and I attribute that to the fact, that's a big reason why I have to make something all the time, but I'm a little different in the sense that I practice a lot of different arts. I'm too restless in my mind, so I make photographs. I make weird collages. I write poetry. I write other weird stuff. I try everything. I made a spoken word EP this summer with my friend because my dad kind of taught me that if you're not producing something, then you're not of value, and I don't know if that's necessarily true, but if that's how he lived his life, he's a carpenter, and, you always had to be making something, there had to be visible evidence of your effort. And so that helps me in the dry times because I couldn't get up and grind out poetry every day. It just wouldn't, there's no way I would go nuts because I wouldn't be able to face up to the failures so many days in a row. And also I think for the really lasting poems, you have to go to a place that's not a good place to go to. Like I couldn't visit there every day. I can't, sometimes you have to go to hell to write something, and I don't want to, I don't want to clock in the time clock to hell every day, so you have to figure out a way to space that out, and so that's what works for me is to balance a whole bunch of different arts, and then I'll get around to doing the writing when I need to. And that doesn't mean that I'm not carrying the ideas all the time. So I'm writing in my head, but I'm not going to sit down and do it until what I'm ready to bring to the paper is pretty well formed, and then I'll knock it out. So
that was actually so nice. I can't even tell you. Did you see me writing down all these ideas? I mean, and I never tire of that question. I want to know what process is because everyone is so different. And I always find like I can find a spark of, I feel like I'm a chameleon of sorts of that way. Like I just want to pick up like, okay, well, I like to try lots of different ways. I don't have one way I do something. So those were really great answers. All three really diverse, great answers. And they all would really helpful. Thank you.
You guys
Thanks
said
for sharing that.
God, I haven't done that in a long time. I need to get back and do some of that. You guys know the Gillian Welch? You guys know Gillian Welch? And so she talked about like when she wrote her first album, like the way she did it is she sat down and she was like, I'm going to write a song that if I played it for Doc Watson, he'd like it. And then she was like, now I'm going to write a song that if I played it for Towns Van Zandt, you'd like it. And that's the game that she would play with herself, right? Like that was her test, you know, to get inspiration. And that's how she wrote and taught herself to write. I think that's brilliant. You know, pick somebody who's a hero and say, I'm going to write a poem that if I had to read it to this person, they'd be like, yeah, you know, this is pretty good.
That's good. That's good. So good. I got to get back into the game. Poetry just is part of who I am. And this last year I started writing a fiction book, and it's being published next year. And so I'm working on edits, and then I'm a teacher, so I'm working again. And I'm like, I feel like I have all these half-written lines. And I know that poets do that all the time. They write all these lines and then they come back and finish it later. But I'm really a finisher. Like I will put it in I'll start something in my phone, or I'll start a poem, and then I'll get busy and then I'll come right back to it. And I will get that poem done. Not always, but most of the time. And it's been interesting that I've been so just like, I can't finish them. I have all these starts and I can't finish anything. So it's driving me crazy. And then I have finished some that I need to send out. That's a whole nother question for maybe another night, because I know it's getting late, but I just haven't even sent anything to be published in over a year, almost 2 years probably.
What are you guys doing on submissions? Like all you guys who are here, not just Mike and Karen, because I've barely sent stuff out either. It feels, I don't know, it feels weird right now with the way things are.
Is that what it is? Because I'm stuck.
Yeah,
I have sent very few submissions out. I hate to say it, since the pandemic, since March. I had a good start to the year, and then it just kind of, I'm also an essayist and I write a lot of essays, and that's what I did a lot of. But no, I think I've written, I just looked at I keep a little notebook of my submissions, and I think I have 3 poems out, and that's it.
I know, I got my website, it's like they're all old. I'm like, I gotta update this.
Yeah, I'm kind of
It looks like some people are opposite. Yeah.
I wish I was that way. That's awesome.
But you have to understand, I hadn't submitted in a very long time for a lot of other reasons. And so the solitude of COVID for someone that is single and lives alone is pretty great for it's not great. It's not great. Don't get me wrong. But it's been great for the muse, and also I just came off a whole summer of new material, so I was just like, I've got to get it out there. So I just became kind of like a taskmaster with myself with Submittable. I mean, I'm going crazy on Submittable, and that's for Morgan and Catherine. That I think I mentioned that in class, but that's your online platform where you can keep track of all your submissions and everything. And there's just something delightful about going on to see the status of them, and it's kind of, once you do it, it then spurs you on to more. But if you get out of the habit, then I got out of the habit for years, so
it's I always forget, that it really is a joy, especially if you publish either in a place that you admire a lot, or there's that social aspect too. If you publish in a place where a lot of people that you admire are also published in that same issue, it's pretty cool. For me, what happened during these last few months is I prized whenever I could write. I prized that felt really important. And I really prized when I could be with people and share it, like read things that were published. And so I just couldn't get myself to feel that same thing about the process of publishing, because you forget about that feels really good too. And it's, you get to throw a party for yourself every time, something comes out, which is super. It's another aspect of it that's super important, but I couldn't get myself motivated to believe in that part of it, during this time, but I need to get back to it too. So for you young poets, don't listen to any of that stuff. Send out and send out and send out and send out, pile up your rejections forever and ever. And that's how you'll get your success too.
We all do. So we all do.
I keep, totally, and this is for,
get as many rejections as you can. That's totally fine.
Absolutely.
I keep a rejection jar, and what I do is I put $1 every time I get rejected. And then at the end of the year, you buy something nice with it. Okay. So no bills. For me, I usually go back to buying books because that's what I like. But I have actually, up until this year, that really pushed me to submit more so I could get more rejections to buy something. I don't know. But
That's a good game.
You're so
We have to invent those games to play with ourselves, to continue to go up against it. But here's the thing. There's no feeling better than having something rejected a bunch and then having a really respectable place publish it and then have people like it. I mean, it's almost better than having it snapped up right away, because there's that element of like, told you so to it, I mean, it's base human feelings, but who cares? It's almost like a revenge thing, it's awesome.
I have a question that's sort of I'm posing for the students, but can any of you remember your first publication and either anything about it or how it felt or anything at all?
Mine kind of ruined me because it wasn't a huge magazine, but they were really generous and they took the whole batch. And I don't know if that was the very first one or close to it, but I thought, and I was young and arrogant and stupid, and I was like, oh, I'm pretty damn good. And then I got that, and then after that, rejection. So it was good for confidence, but it also it elevated me a little bit. So then when I kept getting, in my opinion, like the literary world was abusing me because they won't publish my stuff. I kept getting rejections. It was, in a way, it was good because I had to get used to that.
I had the exact same, Michael. I published my first short story my first year of grad school, so I was 22, I guess. And it was one of the first things that I wrote for a workshop at grad school, and it's one of the first things I ever submitted. And so I was like, oh, this is going to be easy, like I'm really good at this. And then I wrote basically the same story again for 3 years. Every story was the same story. And people were telling me that, and I was getting more and more frustrated with myself. And it was horrible. It was not good. And eventually what I learned is that I was, cribbing the voices of a lot of writers that I really admired, and I was pretty good at mimicking that, but there was nothing in it that was authentic or mine. And so when I came back at it and started, I published a few things from then on. I would publish a couple things a year between then and then I stopped writing after graduate school for about 4 years. And then it was back in about 2008 or 2009 when I started publishing poems regularly. So, and if you looked at the two things, and I'm not going to tell you anything about that first publication, I don't want you looking it up, but they're nothing. I mean, they're not even, you wouldn't even guess that the same writer could have possibly written them.
my first publication, I think, was a literary journal out of the University of Pittsburgh at Bradford. But to be honest, I don't remember the title of the poem. And like both of you, I had success at the college level with literary journals. And then I didn't. You know, I'm trying to think, I think I took 5 or 6 years off of publishing and went into teaching full time and didn't even think about writing again until I was encouraged by my colleagues at JCC. Believe it or not, at my little community college, they looked at what I was writing and they're like, "Why aren't you publishing?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't know. Is it good enough?" And they're like, "Well, I think it's worth a shot." So yeah, it was most of my 20s that I wrote a lot, but I didn't publish at all.
Now's a good time to start juggling, Mike.
I have no skills at all.
Well, listen, guys, I am going to be checking on my kiddos. I like to, do bedtime every night, so not really allowed to miss that. So I'm probably going to say goodbye. And thanks again so much for coming. Mike, if you want to share the recording of this, and then I'll make sure it gets spread around too. I mean, anytime people gather and talk about poems and art and that sort of thing, it's super super meaningful. So I'm glad you guys came. Two more things really quickly. In October, I have another event like this, but it's going to be a complete open mic. So there are no featured readers. This is a Halloween sort of themed open mic. The theme is ghost literature, but ghosts can be interpreted anyway. Everything's haunted, right? So, anything that you feel like is a haunted piece of literature. And costumes are highly encouraged. So I hope that you guys,
Nice.
we can have a little fun with that. I would even say if you are of that age, that adult beverages are welcome at this event. So if you'd like to bring some wine or beer and wear a costume and share some of that, I hope that you guys will come. I think it'll be a lot of fun. So
And
everybody,
the costumes only have to be from the neck up. Right?
you could be like Mike and just wear your underwear on the
Yeah,
bottom.
I mean,
I
just
hope
from the, yeah.
Accept me the way I am. That's just the way I am.
Hey, thank you
All right,
guys.
this
for
was great, guys. Yeah, this was awesome.
Thank you, Justin.
Great.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you.
Guys,
Good
you
reading, everybody. Really
Bye,
good
Rust Belt
reading.
sister.
Yeah.
guys, see you guys later.
Bye. Bye. Bye, young ladies. See you.